Hello, Warhammer 40K players. In this video, we are not going to be focusing on a particular army. I make a lot of Astra Militarum and Imperial Knights videos, and this one's going to be a little bit related to the Knights faction, but it's going to be for everybody. This is going to be a podcast style video, and the reason I like to make podcast style videos, which is more of the talking aspect and less of the visual aspect, is because I like to listen to certain YouTubers like Auspex Tactics and Happy Crumping Wargaming when I drive. And some of my drives are over an hour long, so I can watch a couple videos while I drive. But I'm not actually watching the videos because I have to focus on the road, but I like to listen to something to stimulate my brain and just have something to listen to and maybe learn something even while I'm driving, which for me is just kind of like a brainless act. So, in this video, the topic is going to be how to win more games of Warhammer 40K and how to lose fewer games in Warhammer 40K. And this is going to be tailored toward more newer players, people who are in their first 30 games of Warhammer 40K. And I made this video because I'm in a bunch of social media groups and I really don't like social media, but sometimes people ask good questions and give good answers. And one of the posts recently was in the Chaos Knights Facebook group where somebody said, thinking of giving up 40K, I just can't win a game with this army. And so I wrote quite a lengthy post and I got a lot of good feedback from the community. Somebody said, this is great advice, even for a non Knights player. So the post is kind of a little bit disorganized. So in this video, I'm going to break it down for you. I- As a new player, how do you start winning games and how do you win more games if you already are winning games and want to be a little bit better? So in this video, we're going to go over playing basic 40K. And I'm going to go over what is basic 40K. I'm going to be going over list types and my philosophy on what makes a list basic and what types of units you want to bring. And I'm going to be discussing about how to simplify your your gaming to become more like practice, to make it more like um an orchestra rehearsal or a football team practice instead of just gaming for fun. Gaming should always be fun, but if you have an organized repertoire of gameplay, and if you organize your thoughts a little bit and think actively about things that you need to focus on and things that you need to consider, it will boost your gameplay significantly. And sometimes it's hard to learn certain things, but there are a lot of resources out there, like YouTube, this video you're watching, as well as people in different social media communities and people in real life, players you play, they can actually help you become a better player. And then we're also going to be talking about mindset and how to get games in. So in this video, I'm going to be giving personal stories and sharing my experiences a little bit in between some of these topics. I'm going to be sharing my stories with you so you guys can get a more realistic idea of the 40K experience. So first of all, to start, we're going to talk about the list types. And I'm going to be focusing a little more on Chaos Knights in particular, even though I don't play them. I play Imperial Knights, which are very similar, and some of the detachments function a little bit similarly as of the general list style. But this is going to be for all armies, especially There are armies with a lot of different data sheets and a lot of different detachments that give you a lot of different playstyle options. But basic 40K is pretty much a single playstyle, and I think this is the simplest playstyle and the best playstyle for a new player to start playing 40K and be able to play across multiple factions with the same general ideas. So, in the context of knights, people want to play big Titanics because they look cool. And I believe you can bring up to 5 Titanic knights, but that doesn't really leave space in your list for much of anything else. And I think that's pretty bad for a new player because one of the guard YouTubers, and his name is Joshi Howard, his channel is Joshi 40K. He focuses 99.9% on meta competitive Astra Militarum play. But some of the concepts that he talks about is relevant for other armies. And he says that certain armies are just prone to catastrophic failure. And by army, I don't mean faction, I mean your list building choices. And what does catastrophic failure mean? Well, my interpretation is that the fewer models and the more expensive, bigger models you bring, the more your list is prone to catastrophic failure. Now, I don't mean bring an all horde army and bring the most models because that's a lot of stuff you have to move and it'll make your gameplay a lot longer. And you're not going to be able to experience a more general and a more wholesome view of 40K because there are big units, there are small units, and there are medium sized units that range anywhere from, I believe, 25 points to 800 points. Now, there are Titans too, but we're not going to be talking about that because they're generally not brought anywhere because they're rare and they're not competitive. So let me tell you a story. In my local meta, I have an acquaintance and he plays Imperial Knights. He doesn't really play the most meta stuff. He is a more narrative player. But he played with a newer Orcs player and both their lists catastrophically failed. So this Knights player, he brought a Knight Warden, Castellan, Lancer, and I believe Canis Rex. 4 bigs, a few armigers, maybe an ally or two. And on the first turn, he pushed his Lancer out, which is a decent idea. You know, Lancer, his role is a bullet sponge. You know, he has decently high toughness, decently high invulnerable save. He has a 4-up invulnerable save, which is as good as it goes, except for a few units that have 2-up invulnerable saves, which are really rare. But that's generally a good strategy. But his mistake was he also pushed out the Night Warden too far towards the opponent's natural expansion objective. He left his Knight Castellan back, which is generally a good move, and he moved his 4th Titanic a little bit further than he should have. And the Orcs, I believe they wad the first turn. He lost 2 or 3 Titanics and conceded. He lost most of his army on turn 1. That is what I call catastrophic failure. They reset the army, and this time the Orcs player went first. He moved, and the Knights player pretty much tabled him in the first couple turns, and he conceded. So that is an example of catastrophic failure. The bigger units, the more points cost that you invest in a single unit, the more catastrophic it is. And the harder it is to recover, even for a good player, if you lose that unit or those units. So, in order to prevent catastrophic failure, I recommend a basic 40K list that looks something like 1 to 3 centerpiece big models And most of your army should be main battle tanks, and the rest of your army should be cheap chaff for trade, action, and objective play. So, what do I mean by the 1 to 3 centerpiece big models? They don't necessarily have to be 400 point centerpiece models. And the reason I put 1 to 3 is because, for example, let's say you're a new player, you think the Stompa's cool. I'm not going to stop you from playing an 800 point Stompa or a 765 point Knight Asterius. I am not going to stop you from playing that. But if you are going to bring a unit like that, you probably shouldn't bring more than one. The reason why is if you bring two of those units, that's nearly your entire army, and if you lose one of them, then you lose the game. So I would recommend 1 to 3 centerpiece bigs. And what do they look like? Their data sheets are generally toughness 11 to toughness 13, toughness 11 being a lot of demons, Catan, things like that, usually Xenos and Chaos factions, and toughness 13 being guard super heavies, some of the older knights. Now, a lot of the knights' toughness went down, but the Knight Asterius, things like that are toughness 13. I believe the Stampa's toughness 14. And their role is that they do big damage, and in certain cases, they can go out and start soaking damage too. So those are your big models. Now, if you play Astra Militarum, you will see Rogaldorn tank commanders. And with enhancements, they can be around 300 points. So while they're not giant centerpiece models, they're not huge demons or anything, those are a little bit cheaper, heavy units that you can bring three of and still not have a catastrophic failure as long as the rest of your list is good. So your main battle tanks are not necessarily battle line. They're not necessarily tanks. They're not necessarily vehicles. They can be monsters or they can just be large blobs of things. But their role is to dish damage and take damage. So these main battle tanks, these are going to be like half your army. And they're going to be going out there contesting objectives, dealing damage, taking damage, and they're just your basic and multi-role unit. Now in guard, you can have a large blob of battle line units with a command squad and a commander, and that can be like your main battle tank. In fact, a Cadian Castellan blob with 20 Cadians and a Cadian command squad costs almost as much as a Rogel Dorn. You can add an Ogren bodyguard to that too. And so it doesn't always have to be a single model vehicle. It could be a large blob, like 6 Victrix Honor Guard. That could be like your main battle tank. That is the core of your army. They're not dedicated action pieces. You're not primarily bringing them to perform location based secondaries. You're bringing them to deal damage and to take damage. And these units are generally about 100 to 200 points, your main battle tanks, right? um they can be more or less, but you also want chaff in your list. And what is chaff? 50 to 100 points, 1 wound to 2 wound models that you can just throw out early. These are your disposable pieces, your chaff. You put them onto objectives, you trade them out, you use them for move blocking, which I'll get into later, and screening. And then you have your dedicated action and objective pieces. These can look like Scout Sentinels, Slime Arbo, Calidus Assassin, Locust Destroyer, Triarch Stalker, Lieutenant with a combi weapon, Marine Scouts. They're usually single model, and they're usually 100 points or less, right? Some people, they bring Mephiston and use them as action monkeys. Mephiston in the Blood Angels, he's a little bit more expensive, but these are generally single model units, and they give you tools in the toolbox. And what I mean by that is a lot of them have infiltrators or scouts, or they're so cheap and you just put them in reserves and you use them as a rapid ingress tool, which your opponent needs to screen out if they don't want you walking around their back line, their deployment zone, and freely scoring secondaries. And I like infiltrators and scouts. I think for a new player, you should think about auto-including one infiltrator and two scouts in your basic 40K list. And the reason why is because it gives you very easy tools to prevent yourself from getting jailed and also giving you early mid-board presence so that you can start, if not jailing, you can at least move block and prevent certain enemies from getting to certain areas of the board where you don't want them to be. Maybe you don't want them watching a firing lane. You go block that firing lane off. You go where your enemy wants to go. Maybe you block off access to their natural expansion objective. So it takes them 2 turns to get onto that objective instead of 1 turn. So infiltrators and scouts, they're a great defense and offense tool. And in most armies, usually they're about 100 points or less, give or take. Now, orcs, you have the commandos. The commandos cost more than 100 points, but they can split in half. So you get a 5 model unit and another 5 model unit. And so you essentially have 2 infiltrators. You take 1 unit, but you can split them. So you essentially have 2, which means you can spread them out a little bit more and have a little bit more board control before the game even starts. For allies, you have RTE and Breachers. That is the Rogue Trader Entourage you can take for 105 points, and the Navy Breachers that you attach to the Rogue Trader Entourage, and it costs 195 points. Quite expensive, but you get a redeploy. So you can string it out in the middle of no man's land, block off enemy infiltrators, and then you can redeploy them. So more or less 100 points or so, but some units are a little bit more expensive, but usually infiltrators are 100 points or cheaper, and they're a very valuable asset in any army. I think that Knights is a great place to start. And the reason why I think that Knights is a great place to start is because it's a very simple army and you do have access to the basic 40K playstyle. Generally, when people think of Knights, they think of it as a skew army. And when you're new, you generally don't want to play a skew army. You don't want to play a big horde army with just a lot of cheap models. You don't want to play a super vehicle focused army because they're harder to play and they're a skew. So you're not going to be learning all of 40K. You're going to get a lot of experience with a select handful of units that you're going to be playing, but you're not going to be getting a broad view of how 40K plays. And so a lot of people think that Knights is a heavier skew army, but it's not. In the Iconoclast Fiefdom, that is the 2024 Grotmus detachment for Chaos Knights, you can bring cultists. And in Imperial Knights, you get Quester Forge Pact, which was also last year's Grotmus detachment. And you can bring Skitarii Rangers as allies in that detachment. So Knights is it's not necessarily just a heavy vehicle skew army. You can play fewer Titanics and bring more allies that give you more tools in the toolbox. And there are very few Knight data sheets. So there are only about maybe 10 data sheets that are competitively viable. And most of those data sheets come from about 3 box sets. So you can't go wrong. As long as you're magnetizing and you're leaving options open for yourself, you really can't go wrong playing Knights. If you buy a couple of those box sets, you know that something from that box is going to be going into a competitive army. So the lack of options makes the army simple. Now, there are allies, there are a lot of ally options, but Knights in itself is very simple. And there was a study in the past where the researchers found out this was for marketing, the researchers found out that given a lot of options, a lot of the times the consumers will not buy. So if you give them fewer options, then they're going to make a decision and choose. But if they're overwhelmed, then a lot of the times they will just feel overwhelmed and not buy. And so for a new player playing Orcs or playing Astra Militarum, I think is a little bit harder than getting into Knights, because in Astra Militarum, most of the competitive units they come singly. So Kazarkin come in a separate box, Ursula Creed comes in a separate box, the Chimera comes by itself. Back then, the old box sets, it wasn't like that, but nowadays all the good units are sold singly. And for a new player who has to drop hundreds of dollars into an army, that's going to be very difficult. Every wrong unit they buy is going to cost them about 50 bucks or so. So it's a little bit harder to get into an army. And a lot of people, they post lists or they ask for list advice before they finish buying all the models for their army. They'll buy a box set and then ask the community, hey, what can I add to this box set? And I think that's really great. But Knights is a great place to start, and for new players, I recommend the Iconoclast Fiefdom or Quester Forge Pact. Now, I don't know too much about Iconoclast Fiefdom, and there is a player, I believe he's in Canada, called Ratnu Vaidya. He has a lot of success, so you can go look up his list, and maybe you can find him on social media somewhere. And for Quester Forge Pact, which I do have experience with, one of the best players in the world for that is from Canada, and his name is Jin Singh. And you can find him on Facebook easily. He sometimes comes out on YouTube and on 40K by Night podcasts. And I think he's played for 40K in 40 minutes before. So he's available and you can find Jin. But the reason why I recommend these detachments is because Knights in itself is financially cheaper for the points cost, and you have fewer models to move. So, unlike a Horde army that has 200 or more models, you're only going to have about maybe 50, 60 models maximum as a new player. And that could help you get more reps in. You get to experience how Titanic Knights are played. You get to experience how Armigers or War Dogs are played. And you also get to experience how to play certain allies. So for the Imperium, you can include Sisters, Grey Knights, Agents, and you can kind of get a feel for how units from other armies play as well. I think that Chaos Knights is even simpler than Imperial Knights because you get access to demon allies, which you can play in demon detachments, or I believe one of the CSM, Chaos Space Marines detachments, lets you ally in demons. I believe Emperor's Children lets you ally in demons. So you can't go wrong adding in demon allies to the Chaos Knights because you can play them in a couple other factions as well. And I think it's great because you have access to infiltrators, you have access to scouts, and you have just a lot more tools in your toolbox by playing with allies as a new player. So, next up, we're going to talk about the gameplay. And I'm going to tell you if you're new, play simple. You want to, in the beginning, not really focus too much on the wholeness of 40K. You want to focus on one thing at a time. There's a Korean saying, and the Korean saying is that a baby without teeth cannot eat beans. What it means is if you can't really eat hard stuff before you have teeth, you know? So when you're starting 40K, I want you to ignore all secondaries. And there are a lot of different primary missions. Only play one. Play the hold more, kill more mission. Why? because that will get you really familiar with primary play. And you get to learn movement, you get to learn the shooting phase and the fight phase. And it'll help you learn your army a lot better. So, in Sun Tzu's Art of War, there are two rules. Well, the first two rules. And the first rule is know yourself. The second rule is know your enemy. If you're a new player with fewer than 30 games, I want you to focus on rule number one, know yourself. And the reason why is because you shouldn't worry about knowing your enemy. There are more than 26 factions, I believe, as of now, and you're going to need a minimum of about 30 games to start knowing your enemy and knowing the different gimmicks that different armies have and knowing what to ask for before the game starts. So, there are core rules, and then there are certain exceptions to core rules that certain armies have. So, for example, generally you can have a 3-inch consolidate, but there are some data sheets and some detachments that let you have a 6-inch consolidate. And as a new player, you don't have to know about all the exceptions, but as you play, you're going to be getting experience. And so, in the beginning, if you are on your first 10 games, don't worry about other armies. Focus on your army. Learn your army rule, your detachment rule, and the core rules of 40K. So learn how to move, learn how to shoot, how to split fire effectively, and how to use your fight phase most effectively to help your primary game. The general wisdom on YouTube by experienced players is that movement wins games. And by this, they don't mean your data sheet move characteristic, but it's how you move, right? Every move should have a purpose. You should be going onto an objective. You should be screening your own units. You should be screening out enemy units from deep striking. You should be staging your units, which is hiding your units behind ruins so that the enemy can't shoot or fight them. And trading. Trading is sacrificing your units so that the enemy can expose even more expensive units that you can subsequently kill, and you're slowly trading up. And if you're playing a Titanic army, you can't really trade because every unit you have costs over 300 points. But when you have things like Nurglings that are 40 points, you can use them to move blocks, stick them in front of the enemy, and force them to attack 40-point Nurglings so that you can protect your bigger assets and also help you move block without losing a big chunk of your army. And basic 40K lets you do that when you have a list like how I described previously. You got your 1 to 3 centerpiece models, you have your main battle tanks, and then you have your chaff, your trade, and action pieces. So when you're starting, I want you to play one primary mission. For your first 10 games, as you get your core rules down and you learn how to move and you learn some of your command phase mechanics for certain armies like Astra Militarum or Orcs Tactical Brigade, and even Knights, your bondsman abilities. So as you start learning your core rules, I want you to focus just on yourself. Don't worry about maps. Don't worry about WTC, UKTC, GW terrain. Just play on any terrain, play on any deployment, but just play one primary mission. That is hold more, kill more. And then after the first 10 games, if you're seeing yourself starting to win these oversimplified games, I want you to add more primaries. Don't start with ritual because it's a little bit more complicated, but start with something like Scorched Earth. That way you can experience how actions work without worrying about all the different secondary cards from the chapter approved tournament companion. That's what it is currently. But every edition, they have their own little tournament companion. And you don't want to worry about those secondary cards because it adds another layer of complexity. You want to play just the primary mission. Start with take more, kill more, and then add in things like linchpin, add in things like scorched earth. And then finally, you want to play things that are a lot more complicated like the ritual or unexploded ordnance. Those are the most complicated primaries, but you want to add them after your first 10 games, after you're confident that you know your core rules, you know how to move, you know how your army mechanic works, you know your detachment stratagems, your core stratagems, you know how all of that works, then start adding in complicated primaries. Once you get that down, then you add in secondaries after that. Now, here's my logic. If you get really good at primary and you can learn over 20 games or so how to dominate the opponent in the primary game, when you add secondaries, it's not going to change a lot because some of the time it's going to split your decision and distract you. But a lot of the times, the secondaries are just going to exaggerate the outcome of your moves. So let's say you want to kill the opponent and you pull bring it down or assassinate or no prisoners, and you're going to get extra points for doing what you already wanted to do. So if you have a solid primary and you know that you're going to score 40, 50 points in your primary anyway, adding secondaries, you're not going to score 0 on your secondary. You can add in secondaries, focus on your primaries, and you might still score 60 to 80 points in the game. And that is winning VP, winning victory points. If you can consistently score 60 to 80 points, most likely you're winning at least half your game. So that's what I think you should focus on. And over time, you will learn how to use secondaries to really exaggerate outcomes. You can use it to bait out the enemy to help you destroy them, or you can use it to get essentially free points for whatever you were going to do anyway, or like I said about basic 40K, you can learn how to really use your action pieces and learn how to use reserves so that you can start maxing your secondary points as well as your primary. But in the first 10 games, I want you to focus on playing one primary mission, a single one on any map, right? So you can familiarize yourself with the maps. And the reason why I say use any map is because the maps are pretty similar. GW2, 4, and 6 are pretty similar. And the deployments, some of them are long deployments or short deployments, but they're similar. You know, it's either a straight line or it's an offset. It's two straight lines that are offset by 6 inches or so. And one of them is diagonal, which, you know, it's a straight line, it's just at an angle. And one of them is completely different, and that is the search and destroy, which is pretty much corners, opposite corners of the battlefield. And that's a little bit more complicated, but you can play most any deployment and familiarize yourself with the maps, and it's not going to be too distracting. The general concept is the same for playing primary, standing on circles, right? And so if you do that, then you're going to really have a strong foundation. And in the Bible, it says that you should build your house on a foundation of rock and not on a foundation of shifting sand. And so if you do that, then you're going to become a better player faster than if you start playing your primaries or secondaries, not knowing what you're doing and not having a good feedback loop. And getting to the feedback loop, we're going to go to the next and final section of discussion for how new players can become better and start winning your first games, or if you are already winning games and start winning more games. And it is your mindset and how to get games in. And I'm going to talk about the mindset first. You're going to win games, you're going to lose games. And if you are the Chaos Knights player, you're going to be losing all your games and not winning any game. But the most important thing is not winning or losing, it is learning or practicing something. So my first game, my first 2000 points game, I played against one of the top players in America, Donovan Silo. I had no idea who he was. He had no idea who I was. I just went on the league and asked, hey, who wants to play a game? And I got destroyed. He got 100 points and I got 20. It was shameful. I didn't feel bad. I didn't, I wasn't sad about it. And I didn't even know who he was. I was like, this is my first game. I'm going to expect to lose. I didn't expect to lose that badly. But, he was playing Death Watch. And I got to learn how indirect works. I got to learn how the shooting phase and the melee phase worked. And he taught me a consolidate trick, or a pylon trick actually, where he charged one of my units and then swung over to tag another unit in combat. So while I didn't really learn anything tactically or strategy wise for my army, I learned how to move units, and I learned how multi-model units can, do little tricks. And so I got to practice basic 40K, and I'm very thankful for that. So you win by both winning and losing. So losing helps you win. And some people on YouTube, the general wisdom is that losing is better than winning because you're going to learn something when you lose and you're not when you're going to win. But this is not completely true because I learned by both losing and winning. I think that winning is important because it is half of your feedback loop. And what I mean by that is, let's say you try something. How do you know it's good? Play, right? You can go and get coaching. There are a lot of people, a lot of YouTubers who offer coaching, but if you don't have the funds or you don't have a coach available to you, then how do you know that you're even playing correctly? Well, you have to win for that. So you lose and you know that you did something wrong, but as a new player, that might be confusing because there are a lot of decisions made in that game, right? Maybe you moved wrong. Maybe you prioritized the wrong unit. Maybe you played your secondaries wrong, but it's hard to know because there are so many different variables. So if you lose and then you change something in your game plan, and start winning games, then you know that whatever you change, whatever you stopped doing, and whatever you started doing is working. So you start collecting data, and you're not going to have so many games where you can start running statistics on it, but you're going to know that, hey, I decided to go to this objective with this unit on this turn, and I'm winning a lot more games now than when I moved another unit to this objective and moved this unit somewhere else? So you're not going to always know whether you're playing correctly or not if you don't lose and you don't win. If you win all your games, it's going to be difficult to criticize your gameplay and know what you're doing wrong, right? But same thing if you're always losing, then you don't really know what a winning strategy is. And that's why I said to simplify the game previously. If you play take more, hold more, or no, that's hold more, kill more, then you're pretty much on equal footing with, well, not equal, but you're gonna be on a little more equal, more equalized footing even versus the most competitive players. And the reason why is you're not that experienced at secondaries. You're not really experienced at the game, but the game is so simple that you understand the primary game, the opponent understands the primary game, and it puts you on a more equal footing and you're more likely to win games. And when you win games, then you can understand what am I doing right? If you lose games, with a particular game plan and you're losing all the time and you change it up and you start winning some of your games at least, then you know that, hey, whatever I changed, it's a better strategy, right? And so I'm going to tell you a story about my experience playing Chaos Space Marines. I played Chaos Space Marines 4 times. And the reason I'm telling you this story is because in all these 4 games, I started out losing and then I started winning. And I learned one thing, which is how to reserve your units. So in my first game against CSM, I was still learning how to move, still learning the core rules, and I learned almost nothing, but I did learn something very important, and it is timing. I put out my Knight Valiant, which is a Dominus chassis. He's a heavier knight than the Knight Acheron. And my Knight Valiant was really good in that game, and I was really satisfied. Now, I lost this game, but my Acheron I was also satisfied with. It's not a very good data sheet, but once I got it into melee, it started destroying things. And I played against the Vashtor detachment, so a lot of enemy chaos vehicles. So it was pretty satisfying learning how my knights worked, but I lost. And one of the reasons I lost is because I moved my Acheron too late. I started the Valiant in the middle, and I started the Acheron on one flank. And I moved my Valiant out first, but I kept the Acheron back for a turn, which let the opponent focus into my Valiant and take it down faster than I expected. And so what I got from that one game was I need to defend my Valiant by moving out my Acheron earlier, my other knight, right? And so that's when I started learning staging before I even understood what that term meant. I understood staging, which is get your units ready to move, then have a go turn. A go turn is where you full send with your whole army, right? So I learned the staging gameplay by losing. So that was a good loss. And the second game was against a player called Shai Hulud, and I don't think he plays anymore. 40K. He plays Star Wars now, but he was an excellent player in that he had great sportsmanship. He knew I was new, and he was playing the Bile Detachment, and he told me try reserving something. So I reserved my Titanic. I had the Atropos at this time, and so I reserved my Atropos, and this was a short deployment, and he screened out the sides of the board, so I had to come back down in my deployment zone. After the game ended, I lost that game. He told me, why don't you not reserve a Titanic Knight? Reserve something else. And so I learned in that experience that reserving the Titanic Knight on the short deployment is not a good idea. Now, I played against another Imperial Knights player where I did reserve it on a long deployment, and it did work because Knights don't have good screening capability. Well, the Imperial Knights without their Quester Forge Pact allies. And so they don't really have good screening capability, so it worked. But, going back to CSM, I played two people, played two CSM games, and I lost both. And then the third CSM game was against Shai Hulud. Same guy. And I reserved Warglaves. And at that time, the Warglaves had a 24-inch thermal spear range. So you could bring it out of reserve 9 inches away from the opponent and still get the melt damage bonus. And it was a lot more logical. And the Warglaive is a lot smaller. Each model of the Warglaive is a lot smaller than a Titanic model. So I reserved two of those, and I won the game because he pushed one of my flanks, and I brought a Warglaive out of reserve to slow him down from getting to that objective. And on the other flank, I brought the other Warglaive down to add extra firepower and help the push. And you see the difference between my first CSM game and my third CSM game is that by this time I had learned, hey, let's not leave my Cerastus back, right? I played the Cerastus on the board edge, right? On one of the flanks, and I put my Valiant out into the middle because back then it had toughness 13 and a 2-up base save. It was a super heavy, a true super heavy. And so it was also about 500 points. But, I kind of figured out over time, hey, let's push out the Skitarii Rangers and essentially wrap my Valiant so the opponent cannot get into melee. So, they can only shoot at it, and I get an invulnerable save in shooting. And on the other flank, I'm just going to push really hard, right? So from my first game against CSM, I learned, hey, let's not sit the flank back. We're going to push it out aggressively. We're going to have a big, big go turn on the flank. And so my third game, I won. And that's when I realized, maybe I need to change up my reserves. And maybe reserving the Warglaive is really good, and reserving a Titanic is not always good in every situation. And so I played the fourth game against a different player called John. And he played Creations of Bile. And I also won that game. And I did the same thing I did when I played Shai Hulud. Instead of reserving a Titanic, I reserved two Warglaives. And I played exactly the same way, right? I played a little bit slower in the middle where I didn't push the Valiant out. I just kind of moved him out. And on the flank, my left flank typically, I was very aggressive with the Knight Atropos. Very aggressive, brought my Warglaves out of reserve, and essentially my game plan was let's push the heck out of that flank, and the Valiant will anchor the middle. Why? Logically, because if I leave that Valiant in the middle too long, it's gonna go down. I don't have enough assets to hold the middle all game. But if I can hold two of the no man's land objectives and prevent the opponent from stealing my home, and I hold it just for 3 turns, holding more objectives just for 3 other turns, I'm gonna beat him on primary. And if I can score secondary on top of that, I'm gonna win. That was my game plan, and it worked. And you see, I lost my first 2 games. I learned what I did wrong. I won my second 2 games. And from winning, I got a feedback loop. You know, reserving 2 Warglaves works. It works. In that list, in that detachment, it works. Right? And generally, you shouldn't anchor middle. I'm not telling you this as good beginner advice. Do not anchor the middle. The reason I did that was it was because the Knight Valiant was a super heavy. Toughness 13 with a 2-up base save, 5-up invul. It is pretty much immune to shooting from general chaff units. The opponent had a unit of Havocs firing last cannons at me for pretty much the whole game, and my Valiant didn't go down until turn 5. And the reason is in Questor Forge pack, there's a stratagem called Thronegeist Fury, which lets a Titanic overwatch essentially in the movement phase with 1 weapon. And the Valiant has a 3d6 strength 8 flamer. So it is 18 inches, and in order to have the greatest threat range, you kind of want to be in the middle. That way you have a big radius, you have the most board control. So back then, before the data sheets changed, that was a good strategy, and I lost my first 10 games, but after that, I started winning because I created a game plan, I knew how to reserve things, and I stuck to it. And in a lot of Marine games, that helped me win. Or if I lost, I had a lower margin of loss than I did my first game. I never lost 100-20 ever again. Right? I was at least scoring 40, 50 points, in my losses. And, even on a loss, I consider that a win. Like I consider that, hey, I'm getting better. I'm playing the same army, but the margin of my loss. I'm getting better at contesting primary. I'm getting better at scoring secondaries. And so even though I lost the game, every game, if that margin gets smaller, that means I'm becoming a better player. So don't just think about win-loss ratios. Think about the points you're scoring. Think about your primary. Think about your secondary. Hey, am I scoring all my secondaries but losing on primary every game? Maybe you need to go brush up and focus on your primary. Am I scoring all my primaries and not scoring enough secondaries? Well, maybe you need to go back to your list and add a little bit more action pieces, Maybe instead of taking one of your main battle tanks, so instead of taking a 140-point unit, you might be able to take maybe, 2 or 3 smaller units, and it'll help you score your secondaries and not really lose out on primaries as much. So, you get a feedback loop. So even if you lose all your games, look at the margin of loss and look at your primary score and your secondary score and see what you need to do, whether in list building or in your game plan, to fix that problem. So, finally, I want you to ask questions. Somebody told me once that closed mouths don't get fed. And in the Bible, it says, ask and thou shalt receive, seek and thou shalt find, knock and the door shall be open. So, in the context of 40K, asking the right questions is very important as a new player. You're going to want help learning. So, when you play against an opponent, and you're not familiar with the faction or detachment, ask him, hey, can you explain to me, please, your detachment rule, your stratagems that you have, And once you get more experience, you'll know how to ask, hey, do you have upbeat downy units? Do you have deep strike units? Do you have infiltrators? And you'll start building a list of things that you should ask, right? And a lot of YouTubers have different checklists, but those are some of the things you need to ask. Hey, do you have infiltrators? Do you have deep strike? Do you have uppy downy? Um, some common ones are, do you have 6-inch pile and consolidate? Do you have advance and shoot? Do you have advance and charge? Do you have fallback and shoot? And once you get more familiar, you're not going to need to ask that. You could just start playing. But as a new player, ask that, and people will be very polite and they will explain. They will take the time to explain to you. And so, don't be afraid to just ask people, "Hey, I'm a new player. Can somebody help me with playing? Can somebody help me play primary?" And one of the things that really helped me get reps in, how to get games in, is the local league. When I was new, I posted on a local Facebook, "Hey, I'm a new player. Can you teach me?" Nobody wanted to teach me. Nobody wanted to play me. But, thankfully there was a player called Nathan who played a couple rounds, 1,000 points, couple rounds. He was really busy. But he let me play a couple rounds to help me practice my movement and things like that. Without Nathan, I never would have gotten into 40K. But my second 40K game, I was having a lot of trouble finding opponents. But my second game, the guy told me, "Why don't you join the local league?" And I was brand new. What the hell is the local league? And he told me, "Look, you pay $10, you join the local league, a lot more people will play you." And so I told him, "I tell you what, let's play. And I know you need league points, but let's play. If you beat me and you want those league points, then I will pay $10." Kind of giving him more of an incentive to win. More of an incentive to want to play me, I guess. And he agreed and I agreed. It's $10, whatever, right? Not really sold on what people tell me, but if you're gonna play me, I'm gonna thank you. And so I'm gonna help you get your league points by signing up for the league, right? He was a little bit more competitive minded player. Now in the league, there are a lot of casual players, people crying out new lists, but there are guys that go 8-0. There are guys that go 7-1, right? But for $10, if you join the local league, even if you're brand new, people will want to play you. Why? Because they want their league points so they can get into league finals and maybe win prizes and clout. It doesn't really help your ELO or GT standings, but people, I guess for bragging rights, people want to win. And so, if you join the local league, tell them you're new. Some people will play you, right? People won't just refuse and be like, "Oh, he's a new player." It's like, well, at least I get league points for this. So even if the game takes 4 or 5 hours, at least I'll get league points, and some people will play you. And as you get good, more people will want to play you, right? As you get more experienced. And so, for $10, 8-week season, you could play as many games as you want, but they're only gonna count your top 8 games. I got the first month, I played over 20 games. A lot of people wanted to play me, and I told them, "Hey, I'm new, not familiar to your faction. Can you teach me?" And believe it or not, there are people who spent 15 minutes explaining their army, and after the game, they gave me advice and stuff, right? There's guys like Robert Hare from Mid Table Mercenaries, and he was very helpful in giving advice. Chai Hulud, he was very helpful. There were a few players who were really helpful in just giving me advice and, telling me, "Hey, why don't you try this? Why don't you try that?" You know? And so ask questions and join your local league so you'll get a lot more reps in. Like I said, initially nobody wanted to play me. Once I joined the league, I got almost 1 game a day. Almost. And it was a great experience because I got to try out new things, try out different armies. And remember what I told you about Sun Tzu's Art of War, rule number 2, know your enemy? That really got me kick-started into know your enemy. I get to figure out mainly what a lot of the Marine factions did, but I got to play Eldari, Drukari. I got to play pretty much every faction except some of the more rare Xenos factions. And that could really help you get into the game a lot faster. But if you don't have time, you can still join the league, play some games, and ask your opponent very politely, "Hey, can we just practice the um hold more kill more mission?" And a lot of the times they'll be cool with it. You know, a lot of people they roll their primaries randomly and their secondaries randomly. But if you ask politely, at least, you know, with the basic 40K primary, a lot of people will be glad to oblige. Now, some people they might want to play secondaries, so you might not be able to find a lot of people willing to kind of accommodate you there. But what you can do is this: ignore your secondaries. Even if they play secondaries, ignore secondaries, knowing you're gonna lose, and just focus on your primary. And at the end of the game, see how many primary points you scored. That's how to become a better player. So even if the opponent wants to play secondaries, let him get his reps in. But you don't have to play secondaries. You know, pull the cards and just ignore them. You know, focus on your primary, and at the end of the game, you'll probably lose. But you know, your goal is every single game get that primary score higher and higher and higher and higher until you're constantly scoring 40s and 50s on your primary. And if you can do that, then you're going to build a very great foundation. And eventually, once you start actually, you know, paying mind to your secondary cards, you know, you're going to start scoring higher than a lot of the new players who don't really focus their practice. So in conclusion, in this video, I created this video because a Chaos Knights player said, you know, I'm thinking about quitting 40K, can't seem to win with this army. And I wrote a lengthy post and I got a lot of good feedback from people saying, hey, this is great advice. So I decided to share it with you. And pretty much in your list building, it doesn't matter what faction you play, in your list building, build for basic 40K. You know, limit yourself to maybe one or two big centerpiece models, and then bring a lot more of the 100, 200 point units, things like Armigers and War Dogs, and make sure that you include chaff and some dirt cheap trade and action pieces. Include infiltrators and scouts in your list. And then when you go to reps, focus your practice. Focus on playing primary. Focus on one primary mission at a time. Once you get good, once you get a lot of reps into that and you feel confident, then add in your secondaries, right? And finally, your mindset. When you're playing, whether you're winning or losing, don't focus on winning or losing. Focus on learning. Either you're practicing your basic 40K, getting better at movement, or you're focusing on scoring your primaries, or you know, you're learning how to do certain game mechanics like reserves and rapid ingress, right? So focus on things like that. Focus on baiting and trading. And when you have focused practice like that and you're always learning something, and don't be afraid to open your mouth and ask your opponent to help you learn, then you're going to become a better player. But like I said above, it's going to take you about 30 games to familiarize yourself. So if you have fewer than that and you can't win a game, you know, don't feel bad about it. As long as you have a good list and you have dedicated practice, practicing, you know, very specific skills, after your 30 games, you should start winning and you're going to have a stronger foundation and eventually be a much better player than other players who don't take this advice. So thank you all for watching. And as always, praise the machine god and praise the god emperor of all mankind. God bless you and win your next games.
To the god of all machines, to the god of all machines. His separatist signs are supreme.